Greetings, everyone. My name is Barb Atwell. I wanted to welcome you to our oral history project. It's May 15th, 2021, and this event is being sponsored by the Berkeley meeting of the Religious Society of Friends and also by the Outreach and Nurture Committee. Today, I get to introduce my friend Marc Pilisuk, and we will have an interview and then have time for questions later. Thanks for being here. All right, Marc.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I want to say that it's fine for anybody who wants to unmute and interrupt and ask a question or say something during the talk. First, I want to thank the Berkeley Friends meeting for this chance to talk about my life. I'm actually here on time, which may be a first. I was once introduced as the late Dr. Pilisuk. I grew up in a small attic apartment in Brooklyn where my East European Jewish immigrant grandparents had lived. The slanted ceilings were a frequent source of head bumps for visitors, but we could climb out a window, enjoy sunny days on a flat piece of the roof, and a large tree gave us access to occasional visits from squirrels. We were poor, but in the Depression years, so was everyone else. But one incident stuck with me. I got cranky as a kid over being refused an expensive holiday gift. To teach me a lesson, my dad took me for a ride through a slum area where I saw kids who had no toys at all. When we got home, I put together a bag of my toys to give away to the other kids. The business street close to where I lived had small shops familiar to everybody. Ebinger's Bakery was my biggest temptation. Once I pushed my nose against their window for so long that someone came out and handed me a cookie. The local deli had barrels of pickles. And if I close my eyes, I can almost smell the pastrami and corned beef on rye sandwiches. As soon as I was old enough to step off the curb, I was out on the street after school playing punch ball. This was pure Brooklyn. We used 2 sewer caps as home plate and second base. First and third base might be drawn with chalk, but more often we used the fenders of parked cars. In fact, I recall diving over car hoods for a one-handed catch as a moment of pride. Notwithstanding my mischievous nature, my parents were determined to extend my cultural horizons. They enrolled me in a clay modeling class at Brooklyn Museum and a gardening class at the Botanic Gardens. I remember during the late spring when each of the kids was assigned a small plot to plant vegetables for our own victory garden. With loving advice from Brooklyn College horticultural students who are our teachers, I brought home bundles of food. The teachers sent us home with bouquets. They made a fantastic one for my mother when she gave birth to my brother. At around 7 to 9 years, my family would take summer vacations at a chicken farm in New Jersey. This was a site of a utopian socialist community headed by one of my great uncles who had been involved in the International Workers of the World. Going away for a week or 2 to the country meant packing the car. The other guests were mostly family or friends of the family. The farmhouse was converted into a number of separate rooms with a large kitchen. The women brought their own pots and pans. I could hear them arguing. Whose utensils for who? The meal times were filled with political discussions about the Wobblies, Zionists, sometimes touched on the ideology behind the farm. It was part of an experiment introduced by John Dewey, in which progressive ideas were shared. Some of the more eccentric beliefs included my grandfather Pincus, who peeled a bucket of potatoes, saved only the peels to eat, throwing away the potatoes. He insisted that the peel is where the nutrition is. At another vacation in Cuddybackville, New York, I recall this one because one of the guests brought up a pair of boxing gloves. Famous photo of me and my dad boxing is probably taken there. If you could show that picture. I think it speaks for itself. Being a kid from Brooklyn, I remember feeling that the outdoors fitted me as much more than city life. I felt that those weeks away were as good as the rest of the year. As a reflection, this built the foundation for my love of the natural world. Before I moved to my adult life, I'd like to tell you a little about my parents because they both had a profound influence on me. And what Jewish PhD would miss a chance to talk about his Jewish mother. As an introduction, my brother once brought my mom a book of Jewish humor. It defined a Jewish mother. Defined a Jewish mother someone who believes that it's a rotten shame to only use a tea bag one time. My mom missed the humor. Her reply was, that would be a shame. My mom had a serious hearing loss from birth, got by with excellent ability to read lips. Mom worked as a milliner, sometimes for the fanciest hat shops in New York. She resented the fact that the workers were literally in sweatshops in the back, separated from the fancy air-conditioned showrooms. Eventually, she moved her business to the home, where friends would buy a fancy hat from Saks Fifth Avenue, bring it to my mom's apartment, where she took all the measurements, gave it a personal touch to match their face or hair. Then they returned the originals. My mother charged them less than half the price, with a little bit extra if they wanted a label sewn in. Two more bits about my mom. Once on a bus in Palm Beach, she offered a pregnant Black woman her seat in front of the bus and insisted to the driver that she paid for the seat and could do whatever she wanted with it. My mom was the ultimate networker. In her later life, she acquired a wonderful group of admiring friends who worked together to provide loving care for her. They called themselves Charlotte's Web. I grew up admiring my dad, his ability to fix things, his sense of humor, his common sense. I remember dreaming that we were a pair, Batman and Robin, saving the world from evil. I thought of my dad as a youthful friend. We played chess. He sometimes took me and my friends to a park. We talked politics and the world of problems. My parents were progressive, and I was always able to pick up socialist literature and I.F. Stone's weekly around the house. I remember my dad once in a direct action to move the furniture of an evicted tenant back into the house. I remember discussions about Henry Wallace, Bertrand Russell, Norman Thomas, and listening to records of Paul Robeson and Marian Anderson. Not so surprising that I've been a daily KPFA listener for over 40 years. Those values were sparked by my folks. During the Depression, my dad was among the millions struggling to eke out a living, doing whatever he could. At one point, Dad sold ice cream bars from a pushcart, but he wasn't even covering his costs of buying the ice cream. He was clever, though. He figured out that if he picked up the ice cream just before lunch hour at a busy school, and then turned around afterwards to sell the ice to people needing to refill their ice boxes, he could squeak out a profit. Then he found a regular job selling appliances. After the war, my dad was denied his former job at Bloomingdale's because he had been active in organizing a union. He managed to take on some college classes, just loved school. He found a job selling storm windows and did okay, but his erratic work schedule prevented him from continuing with his education. So let me go back to myself. Transitioning from my young family life to being an adult. A fair warning, there's going to be a love story. I went to Stuyvesant High School, an elite, and at that time, all boys school. I had a long daily commute, lost contact with school friends because my family had been evicted after the war and forced to move from Brooklyn to Queens. I had minimal contact with girls, so when I entered Queens College, where the girls outnumbered the boys, I was overwhelmed and quite awkward about dating. Fortunately, Queens College required a dancing class as one of the 4 PE requirements. I took the social class my sophomore year during the same semester when I met Phyllis in a French class where I really needed to borrow her notebook if I was going to pass. As luck would have it, we both also took an art appreciation class. There we got to sit in the back of the room and hold hands in the dark while the slides were being shown. We engaged in 1955, after which she was selected as the first woman graduate student in Harvard's School of Social Relations. I wasn't accepted at Harvard, but I couldn't have afforded to go there anyway. Instead, I managed to live on fellowships from the Department of Psychology at the University of Michigan. I went to Ann Arbor in 1955, and she joined me, and we lived there for 10 years. Before we were engaged, Phyllis's oldest sister told me a secret, which I promised not to tell Phyllis. At 16 years old, she had woken up one morning with half of her body paralyzed and a loss of central vision in one eye. She was diagnosed with MS by a family doctor who told the older sister, and they agreed not to tell Phyllis or her father. Her periodic symptoms, largely bouts with double vision and fatigue, were manageable. When she decided she wanted children and was ready to postpone her degree aspirations, I had to tell her so that we could seek medical advice and assess the risks. Phyllis was determined to defy any risks to become a mother. For me, unable to decide between clinical and social psychology programs, I finished the requirements for both of them. I loved clinical work, but I went the academic route. I consider my greatest mentor to be Anatole Rappaport, a multidisciplinary scholar working in conflict resolution. My research design under his tutelage allowed me to lead subjects into a deep deadlock of distrust, and then through unilateral initiatives to develop steps toward mutual collaboration. When this worked, even with simulation of conversions from a Cold War race, I thought I could help end the Cold War. A federal grant let me hire research assistants. Two were former presidents of Students for Democratic Society, one of them, Tom Hayden, and I co-authored a prize-winning article, Is There a Military-Industrial Complex? Tom was already a rising star. It was with this work that I came to realize that my insights from studies on the moves needed to end conflicts were unlikely to be applied. What was missing was not the knowledge of how to end dangerous and costly conflicts, but rather the heavy vested interests seeking to keep military buildup alive. I devoted years of study to identify the power of those vested interests and how to seek peace despite them. Some of this work appears in my latest book, The Hidden Structure of Violence. The escalation of the war in Vietnam in 1965 was based on bad intelligence and a disturbing view of America's interventionist role in the world. A group of us met in the basement of one faculty member to discuss how to protest. One suggestion was to begin a day-long university strike, which would have information about the war made available. Word leaked out about the strike, and we got warnings from the school president and from the governor of Michigan. At yet another meeting, someone suggested that if we wanted us to teach, we would teach in by occupying the school all night with protests and seminars. We contacted colleagues in colleges across the country, encouraging to do the same, which shortly afterwards was said to be evidence of a conspiracy. The event itself began with a speech by Kenneth Boulding, a Quaker economist and founder of general systems theory. It began in a freezing courtyard in front of the building before it could be cleared of a bomb threat. The teaching went on to a national event in Washington, D.C., where empty chairs were provided for the government officials who refused to attend. The experience was a life changer. It also led to a decision by the director of the Mental Health Research Institute to let me know that I would not be recommended for tenure. But I was recommended to Purdue to be an associate professor with a joint appointment in a very plush administrative sciences program and in psychology. I collaborated with a sociologist friend using the methods of network analysis to test the question of whether Lafayette, Indiana, Purdue's home, had a unilateral elite or a pluralist power structure. We were able to demonstrate that in decisions involving allocation of resources, in fact, there was a definable power elite. It happened to include some high-ranking individuals within my own school. But the study, very professionally done, did not identify these individuals. One reason that study is worth mentioning is that it gave me one source of suspicion about why I was eventually told by my dean that my contract was not going to be continued. In actual fact, that was not related to my departure. 30 years later, I found out from a colleague who was writing his memoirs that the dean of the school where administrative sciences was housed had received a letter from the school's major benefactor. It was in response to my letter to the New York Times expressing opposition to the Vietnam War. The benefactor had written that faculty should not express opinions outside of their area of expertise, and certainly not be associated with a radical newspaper like the New York Times. In truth, Phyllis and I, with our 2 young children and surviving a flood of the Wabash River in our faculty housing unit, were only too happy to move on. An offer from UC Berkeley was a blessing. Moving to Berkeley in 1967, we moved to Berkeley in 1967. It was a summer of love. In my first semester, I was allowed to teach a graduate seminar of my choice, Psychology and International Conflict. The 6 students met in a cafe espresso. We discussed some of my favorite readings, and I thought I had really arrived at vocational heaven. During the next term, however, I was given a campus map and assigned to teach social psychology, which had not been taught for over a year. I showed up at a large lecture hall with a note: "This is history of California. Social psychology has been moved to another room in life sciences." I found my way to that room. It's a large descending lecture hall, entirely packed, including the aisles with students. A baby was crying. A large dog made its way down the aisle. trying to write on the chalkboard. This is social psychology, but the buttons to bring the board within reach were not working. I climbed on the eraser ledge to identify the course. Someone helped me turn on a microphone. A bunch of students walked out, leaving the room, and a bunch more were then able to squeeze into the room. Many were holding IBM cards and demanding that I admit them into the course, which they needed for graduation. I didn't have enough teaching assistants to cover the discussion sessions, so I persuaded a few graduate students to do this just for the experience. Phyllis and I love Berkeley. Phyllis is the reason I found Berkeley Friends Meeting. The meeting was a refuge and a spiritual guidepost for her as she wrestled with the search of a talented woman denied the full flowering of her potential by the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. I have some pictures of her, which some people here might remember. Maybe we could show some of the pictures of Phyllis.
Do you want to talk about it, Mark?
Hmm?
Do you want to talk about each one or just flip through them?
Well, I just want to say we were young once. We could go on to the next one. This one was at Carmel, which was really a treat when we were able to go there. Go ahead. It just feels a little bit older, so some of you may remember her. You will see some consistency in this, that one of the things she always had, whether she was posing for a photograph or not, was a smile.
Oops.
And this is the iconic picture of the way I remember her most. And here again, another picture of her smile. And then there's a picture of, following this, a picture of Phyllis in a wheelchair after she had discovered poetry. The poetry was a saving grace for her. It gave her a sense of meaning, and she was not an entrepreneur, but I persuaded her to put her poetry together, and we have collections of 4 books of her poetry and 1 poem that I asked Barbara if she would read.
I would be happy to. To my children, love carries us a long way, brings us past skinned knees, past wounded hearts and uneven ground, strengthens us to face empty pockets, weakened muscles and joints, demise of parents and friends. Love, a liquid never used up, but passed on from one newborn to another. It is a lifeboat which keeps us afloat in rushing waters.
Thank you. After our first year in Berkeley, we took a chance. We borrowed from family and bank, put a deposit on the North Berkeley home, where I still live. Oh, there was another picture there. Can you come back to that picture? That
Sure, I'll bring it back. Hang on. Okay, hang on. There we go. The kids.
there was that one. So that's a picture of our young family. Shortly after we got to Berkeley, we had a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, and it's just an endless memory. We tried to get around as much as we could. Thanks. We took a chance in Berkeley. We borrowed money from family and banks, put a deposit in North Berkeley home where I still live. We loved Berkeley. We found that the ease of contacts that we had would belied something that we were finding, that it was difficult to have a close network. People expected transiency. Neighbors and colleagues were not automatically friends. Phyllis heard about intentional families in an MSW course. We passed on notes to people for a picnic to discuss this. 5 families, each with 2 children, signed up. And we had a limited agreement to get together for an event once a month. The purpose was to develop caring relationships, and it was okay to ask for favors and also okay to refuse. For 2 years, we lived with this enriching experience. A group of colleagues wanted to offer a consultation on how to help other groups form intentional groupings. We didn't want to charge for this, so we decided to write a grant proposal. In looking into the background research on social support networks, I was blown away by an extensive evidence that integration into continuing network of support was a key factor providing a buffer against every form of physical and behavioral breakdown. How could this be? How could the immune system know that you are loved? I worked for 15 years after that with studies culminating in a book, The Healing Web, Social Networks and Human Survival. I escaped the draft and spent a lot of effort helping my students to do the same. My involvement in anti-war movement was continuous. Recall one incident in which a massive group of students were planning to march in memory of victims of police shootings on Telegraph Avenue. I was among the crowd that had assembled at Westgate, coming face to face with police from many jurisdictions, armed with bayonets to prevent students from leaving the campus. The police, looking for a spokesperson, came to me, told me that the administration had given in and was going to allow the students to assemble for the memorial service at Sproul Plaza. I hopped on top of a car with a megaphone, yelling to the students that we had succeeded. We could go back to and avoid violence. We entered a fully packed plaza through a cordon of police, admitting people to the plaza, but not from it. Amidst this crowd, helicopters appeared and sprayed us, and coughing students rushed to get wet cloths and towels to relieve their burning eyes. I retired early from UC to end my commuting to the Davis campus and to be more available as a caregiver. I've since been teaching mostly from home at a distance format graduate school, where I was able to create courses in ecological psychology and in sustainable development. I continue to teach a course in globalization and power. I've accumulated awards for research, for graduate teaching, for advocacy and public service. In my acceptance remarks, the California State Psychological Association Award for Lifetime Achievement, I took the opportunity to indicate that they might want to take back the award, considering that I have been a long-time critic of a profession designed to help people adjust to conditions imposed upon them by an unjust society, and failing to bring its patients and its practitioners to work against this injustice. I received one award in the memory of Howard Zinn, historian whose advocacy for justice for ordinary people continued until the last days of his life. I received a mounted eagle feather from the Native American Studies program. The program, housed in the department I chaired, needed advocacy for its alternative ways of scholarship in a somewhat narrow-minded university system. I've been a president of Psychological Association Division of Peace Psychology and a founding member of the Psychologists for Social Responsibility. So all these trophies leave me feeling rather humble about how little we know of how to preserve the amazing experiment of life. As I lose my sight and my stamina, I have fears that my work and that of my colleagues has not risen to what is really needed. And sometimes ask, why do you keep doing this if you look at the state of the world? And I recall a circumstance where a journalist looking over the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem noticed that there was one man who came there to pray every morning. The same man would come back to pray at noontime. He would come back a third time to pray in the evening. The journalist noticed that he would do this day in and day out. After a period of weeks of watching him, he asked the man, what do you pray for? He said, in the morning, I pray that there should be peace in the streets of Jerusalem. In the afternoon, I pray that there should be peace and understanding between Arabs and Israelis, that there should be peace and Palestine in the Middle East. And in the evening, I pray that there should be peace, harmony, and understanding for the people all over the world. Wow. How long have you been doing this? Oh, about 40 years. How does that make you feel? Well, I feel like I've been talking to the wall. And maybe that's not so bad. I wish my experience had left me with a wise message to share on how to create a world of peace, justice, and environmental stability. I will leave that to the next generation and just give my thanks to the many people who have been a part of my life story. May we be strengthened through our community. Thank you all, and thank you to the friends for giving me this chance to talk about my memoirs.
Thank you, Mark. What a wonderful story. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All that twinkling is Quakers clapping, okay? So we have time for some questions. I will, since there are, I think I can see everybody. If someone would like to speak, if you want to just raise your hand or, yeah. Tammy, did you have something?
Oh, I want to know what Mom knew about her diagnosis. Before you
Well, there was an agreement between a local family physician and my daughter's sister, who was 10 years older than she, that what she had was multiple sclerosis, that there was nothing that they knew of at that time that could do anything about it, that the course was uncertain, and why worry her dad and her? Why not see what would happen? I mean, it was probably a horrible decision, but it fed into my own desire also to deny it, and her strong desire to deny it. And we went through a lifetime of getting increasing disability and always pretending that we were at the state that we were at previously.
What did she think when she experienced double vision? Did she go to the doctor or?
We would sometimes go to the doctor, even, when I knew her, we were in graduate school, we would go to, I mean, she would be going to the medical center at Harvard, and then in the medical center at the University of Michigan. And even then, they did not tell her. So, amazing.
It is pretty amazing.
Who's next?
Mark, do you have any words of hope for peace in the Middle East today? I mean,
this is a it's really which really looks ominous. My own thought about this is that when I talked about a military-industrial complex, I didn't mean a small segment of the society that holds a lot of power. I meant an elite sector which is so invested in every other portion of the society, in the food supply, in healthcare, the major defense contractors have interlocking board members with Sarah Lee. I mean, it extends into almost every sector of society. And within that sector, there's a dominant theme that they have been able to sell. I mean, a large portion, a significant portion of the budget that goes into our Defense Department goes into public relations firms, or what they call perception management organizations. So it's not by chance that the world we see is a world of separate nation states competing against adversaries, always needing military preparedness and military preparation to benefit from that. And as part of the network of who are the good people, we're in the United States is part of a network of strategic defense and economic relationships with parties all over the world. Israel being one of the strongest partners of that, with a significant portion of our economy relying upon the sales of weapons to Israel, and with a consensus for some time about the enemy being the other. And after the Soviet Union dissolved, the enemy became the terrorists, and they were the colonized Arab countries. And the United States is very much locked into this association with a number of countries for strategic reasons. And because of the power of this group to control who it is that will speak to you, to tell you about the conditions, it will typically be a State Department or Defense Department person who has had an affiliation with the Armed Services Strategic Network in the past, and that the range of options that we are given is, do we stand tough to defend the good guys on our side, or do we give in? So coming back to the question of Palestine, what is really so much needed now is the ability to talk and to listen. And to the extent that now that there is an interesting voice that's suddenly appearing in Congress among progressive groups, there are people who are saying that however the issue gets resolved, it has to be recognized that Palestinians are people. They live there and they're recognize that it's not the image of all of them being out there throwing missiles at Israel is a myth. And the hope that we can hear those voices is, in my mind, the most important thing that could lead to a resolution of the conflict.
Thank you. Brent, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, can everybody hear me? Okay. Mark, this is Brent, and I'm wondering about your work in conflict resolution and whether you have focused at the individual level, at the group level, or at the national level. And in part, some of the comments that you just made are about the national level, but maybe you could speak to any of the others. Thank you.
I think of two circumstances that at a group level. One, when I was teaching at Purdue University, I was invited as a new young faculty member to debate against the head of the political science department on the Vietnam issue. And he started off with quizzing me about whether I believed in free enterprise and the like. And in that debate, I had to really be very careful with the audience. And one of the things that I did when I got my turn was to read in the debate the Viet Cong plan for the takeover of all of South Vietnam. And I said, well, no, this is obviously harsh, but is it so bad that American lives should be used to oppose it? And the debating partner interrupted me and said, that is absolute tyranny. We should all be willing to die in order to overcome that. And then when I told them what I had actually read was a US pacification program. So it was an opportunity to use humor and surprise. I have one other kind of interesting circumstance where I was chairing a program of the American Orthopsychiatric Association. It's a progressive professional organization. They were having a session on meeting the unmet needs of people who were left out of society. And they had a very prominent group of panelists there, including the author who wrote the famous book on Black Rage. And there were a number of protesters stalking the halls of the convention, and a bunch of them marched into the room. There were maybe 400 people in the audience, maybe 100 protesters coming in and started shouting that the group had no legitimacy, that they were the ones who were left out, that they should determine the program, and that these professionals were just part of the problem. So people were shouting, people were yelling to call the police, call security. People were threatening to, and come up in front of the room and take over the microphone. And what I was able to do then is to say, well, nobody can be heard unless we speak one at a time. So what I was able to do is to get the people who had invaded the room to line up behind the microphone. And then as we heard what some of them had to say, which was quite interesting, and I worked with the panel to ask whether they would be able to forego their formal presentations and give their paper, mail their paper to any people in the audience who wanted to hear them. And in that way, we got the dialogue going among the protesters and people in the audience and the panel. And I think about that, you know, there's something in the teachings of nonviolent activism where the situations you come up with are not tailored for what you need to do, but what you draw from the principle is that people can be treated with respect, can take risks, and can come to an understanding. So I guess, you know, I have been interested in this at the regular level. I know that as a family therapist, there were certainly situations where I was dealing with conflict resolution at the most intimate level, and yet realizing that with the tools in my bag, I was not able to work with the community resources that were going to be needed to work this case for over the long time.
Mark, this is Barb. I just wanted to point out that you've been very active in the Social and Environmental Action Committee for our meeting. And I wanted to thank you for your contributions on that. And one of the main issues you're focused on right now is Myanmar. Is that correct?
It's it's again an underreported major tragedy, lots of people losing their lives. And, you know, it's a very difficult one diplomatically. The question of how one deals with a brutal dictatorial military regime with atrocious dealings with minority populations is not, in my mind, resolvable by decisions to create economic boycotts and do threats of force. It seems to me that what's needed is a little bit more Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and the respect for the fact that even those dictatorial and military leaders have fears and are real people. And that the dialogue has to start
Thank you, Mark. I know, Mitch, you had a question?
Thank you. Yeah, Mark, listening to this beautiful, moving narrative from your earliest life, I was struck by the continuity of compassionate, altruistic values that your parents and even your extended family were teaching you, not in the sense of teaching, but just by being who they were. And that you have so beautifully lived true to what you learned from your very early beginnings. And I was reminded of a quote from, oh, now I lost it. Well, from Gandhi. I don't know where, I thought I had it on my computer, but it's not there. Oh, well. But just if we are to achieve real peace in the world, we must start with children and, you know, let them grow up in their, he said, their natural innocence. It was a very eloquent, I don't have to read the whole thing, but it seems that this, the family values, the socialization that you had, you found your way to continue this in the love that you found with Phyllis, in the way you raised your children, and in your whole career and your activism. So do you have any, I just want to bow to that and ask if you have any further reflections on it.
Well, I was lucky. I chose good parents. And but I know one time I was asked to help with someone who had a big pot of money that was going to some reform projects in the Los Angeles area. And they asked me, with my little knowledge of Los Angeles, what the money could go to. And I came up with the idea that people at any age can be helped, but it makes a large difference to invest at the earliest age. I am also continuously amazed at the potential of resilience in people who have emerged from years of torture, from years of incarceration, and who have come on to be leaders of spiritual efforts to improve society. So it's not only the babies that we have to take care of, but the people whose experience bears witness to what we have to change.
So Miriam, when we first started, you mentioned that you had met Phyllis and wondered if we could get that on the recording. Could you unmute and just mention your relationship with her? She's getting her microphone. There you go.
I was still very new in the meeting, and I remember knowing who she was and that she was there, but I'm afraid I can't contribute very much to your question.
But she was active and came often. George, did you also know Phyllis?
Yes, she was regular attender.
Thank you. Anyone else?
We had an occasion of assistance from people from Friends meeting during the time when we were in Ann Arbor. I had one semester right after I got my degree where I had a chance to teach, to fill in somebody who was on sabbatical at Oberlin College in Ohio. And we left Ann Arbor. We had everything that we owned packed up into our car with a 2-month-old baby in the middle of the winter. And we drove through, actually Oberlin was so small, we drove through it without realizing that we had passed it. We got stuck trying to turn the car around. But shortly after we were in Oberlin, Phyllis had the most serious attack to that time that she had had. Here we are in a strange place, a newborn baby. And she was losing her balance when she tried to get up, going blind. And we were befriended by a Quaker family, the elders there, who were just there to be with us and to be able to offer help to us. And that got us through the months before and after Phyllis and the baby went on a trip to stay with her sister for a few weeks and then come back. It left a deep impression with me.
Mark, I wanted to thank you so much for sharing your afternoon with us. And I just wanted to do one last call, see if there are any questions. And now we have it on recording. Laura, do you want to speak? Just need to unmute.
I just wanted to say hi, Mark. This is Laura X, and I just wanted to be sure that somebody saved you the chat because I wrote you my story about Ebingers.
Oh, wonderful.
I didn't know if anyone
Go ahead, tell us the story.
tell you this. Oh well, what it was fun. I was when you mentioned Ebingers, Mark. I remembered that I had been a picket captain for Corps in front of the Montague Street Ebingers outlet, and so I was trying to figure out how it was that you were at Ebingers, if I heard you right, before the war. Is that right? Before World War II?
Uh, yes.
Yes. Okay, well, this is really intriguing to me because I was a picket captain because they wouldn't hire Jews, blacks, or even Catholics. And this was in 1961 or so, 61 or 2, probably 1. And so I looked up when was Ebingers founded, and it was 1898, it turned out. But I wondered if in your day anybody noticed, with the under the rise of Hitler that there were no Jews or blacks or Catholics allowed.
Well, there were certainly s- some, there were certainly some observations about how we were segregated by neighborhood. And we were, and how much people were tied to their own clans. Um, my mother family had grown up in a mostly black neighborhood. I grew up in an all-white neighborhood. Um, the black people I knew of were black heroes. Um, Joe Louis, Paul Robeson. But I don't think that there was a black child in my school.
Wow.
Um, I told you this incident of my mom, this is quite a bit before Rosa Parks, when she told the bus driver in West Palm Beach that she was going to give the seat to this pregnant black woman. That was her seat. She paid for it. And it seemed like the right thing to do.
Well, yes. I had missed the part that she was pregnant. I missed that it was in West Palm Beach. Thank you for for amplifying that. Did she know her? Do you know?
No,
Hmm.
no, she didn't.
Right. It was just a matter of principle, which is a good thing.
That trip to Florida was something that I have lifelong embarrassing memory. Um, we took a train ride there, my mother and I, and my mother, I think perhaps ashamed that the tip was not as large as she would have wanted it to be for the porters, gave me the money to give the porters. And I thought it was a lot of money, so I saved half of it to be able to give on the trip back home. Um,
Oh, that's funny.
Part of the Depression era stinginess. That's,
What happened when you gave them the tip?
oh, just in an envelope, and just they just took it.
Well, do you remember that your Congress member was, let me remember exactly, the nephew of one of the leaders, top leaders of the strike of the Pullman porters?
Which Congress
That
person?
that was Ron Dellums.
Oh yeah.
So I think it was his uncle, um,
Oh,
that was one of the big deal leaders of that famous strike in
Thanks,
Chicago, I think,
mhm.
in
yeah.
particular.
Ron Dellums was an amazing presence for so long.
Yeah. Mark, is there anything else you want to share? Or shall we wrap it up?
I think I've kept people here a long enough time. I just want to thank you all. It's been a privilege to be able to be part of this.
Well, please keep up writing. I'm so grateful that you've written this. And particularly at the beginning, I thought to myself, wow, that kid sure can write. And how poetic it was, the phrasing at the beginning, especially. I loved it.
Well, I am writing. I wrote something on why people are fleeing from Guatemala. And I wrote something recently about the disparity between the Biden administration's appointments and actions on the domestic front and the appointments and actions in foreign policy.
Did you email it out? Did I miss that one?
I can send it.
Oh, yes. Well, you have quite a few devotees.
Oh, thank you.
And we love sending out what you write, but we never know if they get published. Your open letters to the New York Times and so forth, that radical newspaper. So do tell us if they get published, okay?
Okay, I recently somebody was interested in reviewing some of the op-ed pieces and circulating them outward. And so that has happened with one recent article. Somehow it appears in little newspapers that I never heard of, but I'm really happy that it does.
Great. Well, nowadays, if anybody types in your name, the little newspaper will come up with it.
Uh-huh.
So you're helping that newspaper.
And
So Mark, thank you so much for everything that you do. We really, really appreciate it.